Daniel here, and we are back with the Virtual Robotics Studio. This video, we are going to try to attach our chain finally. I know we were going to do it in the last video, but we didn't get to it. And then we're going to work on the second section of the arm. So of course, we'll need all the chain stuff that we talked about in the last video. We need our 25 chain, our fancy Rev chain breaker tool, or a Dark Soul tool or equivalent. Two more of those 24-tooth Andy Mark sprockets. We need our inline chain tensioners that we're going to be using. And then we've got a couple bolts and washers to help hold these in place once they're attached. And once all of that's done, we're going to move on to the next arm section. We're going to need 4 of these Andy Mark T-brackets. We're going to be using a couple piano hinges, and you're going to need a section of polycarbonate. We're going to cut it from scratch from the big sheet, but make sure you're getting polycarbonate and not plexiglass. So you want to make sure polycarbonate is a lot tougher and more durable and won't crack and break on you when you're manufacturing and using it. And we'll also need a bunch of 1x1 aluminum box as well. All right, I think that's everything. Let's, again, clear everything out, bring in the robot, and get started. Special thanks, as always, to Argosy and Everybot. All right, so the first thing is, let's make sure we have our chain brake tool set up. If you did get the Rev one, and it looks the same as mine, I believe this piece already starts in the tool, and I think you get an extra one of these in the bag. So just make sure that that piece is screwed into the hole by the big R on Rev. Next to it, and this was already in on mine as well, but it looks a little bit different. It sort of has a little cup shape on the end of this instead of a pin. So find that one, make sure that is in the V, the hole by the V. And then also in the bag was a little bolt. And this bolt, if you go across from the R on the other side, there is one bigger tapped hole, and this bolt should be screwed into that hole. And we'll probably have to adjust that bolt to make everything work correctly. Okay, then let's take a look at the chain and talk about how this chain works. So first of all, this is 25 chain, and what 25 chain means is that the distance between the pitches is 0.25 inches. And the pitches basically are these holes. When the sprocket drops in, right, those holes will go around the teeth on the sprocket. And so the distance between them is 0.25. So you just need to make sure if you're doing 25 chain, you also have 25 sprockets. You might see 35 chain and 35 sprockets as well. And then it just keeps getting bigger from there. But there are 2 different sections that make up a chain link. So we have this section that's right here on the end. This is an inside section. So we can see there are 2 plates, and they both run on the inside with these kind of cylinders attaching them. And then the next one, there are these 2 plates on the outside. And that's what I would call an outside section. And we can kind of turn it from this side too, and you can see we have the plate on the top, and then we have the plate underneath, and then the plate on the top, plate underneath, and so on. We need, with this chain brake tool and with the tensioners that we're going to be using, this piece on the tensioner actually replaces or lines up perfectly with that inside section. So what we really want to do is we want to remove this first inside section and replace this pin through here on our chain tensioner. And that's how we're going to be able to connect it together. So our first step is going to be to break off this inside section, and then we'll reattach it with this chain tensioner in it. Then we'll measure our chain, and we'll do the same thing on the other side to connect the chain to the other side of our chain tensioner. And then we should be good with the first chain, and then we do the whole process a second time. So if you take your chain, and the chain is a little weird, it will fight you a little bit because it doesn't like to twist. But what we want to do is make sure this pin here, you can see it's poking through. I want to make sure that's unscrewed so nothing is in the way. And then we're going to take the chain, and we're going to lie the chain down so that in between, there are these pins that help you align the chain. In between these last 2 pins, that's the one that we're going to push out. That's the link that we're going to push out on the chain. And so what I want to do is I want to align this so that I have the inside link off the edge, and that end pin here on the R side of the tool is inside of that inside link. Then the other pin will be inside of the outside link. And what's going to happen is when we tighten this pin in, it's going to push the pin in the chain out, and we'll be able to take that inside link out, and then we'll put our chain tensioner in place. Now, this other pin here, we're going to use to push the pin back in, but also right now, if you tighten this one by the V, you can tighten that in, and that will sort of pinch down on the chain and help hold it in place. So now the chain is kind of locked in there, and I don't have to worry about all this extra chain causing any problems. Okay, and start with this screw kind of all the way in, and all we're going to do is we're going to start tightening this one, the one by the R. We're going to tighten it in, and now that pin is actually making contact with the chain, the pin on the chain. And so as I tighten this, we're going to start pushing that pin out of the chain. So let me spin this around a couple times, and we'll be able to see. So you can see in this little gap here, that is the pin that was holding the chain together. It's starting to get pushed out. And when that pin hits the screw, we won't be able to push it any farther. So that'll act like a stop for us. And if the stop is in the right spot, everything will come apart. If the stop's not in the right spot, then we'll have to adjust the stop. So turn this, and just keep turning it. Keep tightening this screw in until you'll know when it hits the bolt, because it really won't go any farther. And when that happens, we're just going to check really quickly if it went far enough. So I'm going to loosen up this pin by the R, or the screw by the R. And you got to go all the way until the pin that's attached to this screw is out of the chain. And then I think we don't technically have to take the other one off. I think if you can just grab that middle link, and I use the Allen wrench here to kind of flip it up out of the way. If it falls out, we are good. You're all set. If it doesn't fall out, go ahead and tighten this one back in and just give it one extra tug, and then loosen it out and try again. And if it still doesn't fall out at that point, what you want to do with this screw here is just loosen it up like a quarter turn or a half a turn, just a little bit. And then by pulling the screw back, you'll have just that much more room to push this out. But it's very important that we don't go too far, because when I unscrew this one by the V, which is the next step, and I take this out, you can see that pin is still connected in the outside plate here. If we push that pin all the way out, then it's going to be really hard to get it back in. So if you push the pin all the way out, you probably just want to go ahead and break the next inside link to start over. But what we want to see is we want to have these two outside plates and that pin still attached. All right, then we're going to attach it to our inline chain tensioner. And when we push this back in, it's going to get pushed in by the pin by the V. So I'm going to unscrew this screw that the Rev V is pointing towards. And the position for this one is going to be with that pin pointing at the V. So that extra pin that we have pushed out on our chain is pointing towards the V. And one of the links will drop onto that pin. And you can see now, if we start tightening this one in, it's going to push the pin back into the chain. All right, but we want to get that attached to our chain tensioner as well. So what you have to do is you can sort of tighten this a little bit so it kind of grabs. And the other thing you want to watch for is make sure that the pin in here ends up inside of the screw that we're screwing in. Make sure that it does line up with this screw in here, or the end of that screw, which is that sort of cup point I called it. And then we're going to take our inline chain tensioner and slide it inside of here. And if it can't go, you might have to just loosen this up a little bit. I think I might be pushing a little too much. So this should slide into here. And we're really just trying to, I think this needs to basically be sticking more or less straight up in the air. And I'm just looking in there to make sure it's lined up with the hole as much as possible. And once you have this in, we're going to slowly start tightening this down. And it's going to slowly start pushing the pin back in. And one trick is to, I'm kind of doing it up in the air so you can see, but if you slide this to the end of the table, then you can turn the Allen wrench without lifting everything up. So everything can stay on the table and stay sort of secured for you. All right, but here we go. So we're going to start tightening this in. And you want to just make sure that chain tensioner stays in there. And as you're turning this, if it gets really hard to turn early, your chain tensioner is probably misaligned and you're hitting on the side of it. So back it off, realign everything, and try again. But if it sort of is going nice and smoothly, just keep going until you feel it hit the other wall on the chain tensioner here. So now that's tight. It's not really wanting to go anymore. So then I'm going to back this screw out all the way. And when I pull this out, that link is now pushed through and holding my chain tensioner in place. And you want to check and make sure that that pin is poking out the other side. So it looks like mine, maybe I could push it just a tiny bit more. But again, this has to be straight up. So I'll give it one more little push just to get it as flat as I can get it. So we're back in tight. I'll just give it one more tug. And that's probably about all we can do. All right, did that do? Yeah, that pushed it through a tiny bit more. But as long as you have some of that pin poking out on the other side of this plate, then we're in good shape. So that's one side of the chain. Now, how long does this chain need to be? Well, the easiest way to figure that out is to measure it on the robot. So over here on the robot, what we're going to do is take another one of our 24-2 sprockets, and we can slide that down here on the bottom one, on the bottom shaft, our jack shaft, which is connected to the motor. And then if we take this chain, and it's going to get unspooled now and get a little messy, this chain needs to go all the way around both of these sprockets, and then it needs to connect back up. And so what we want to do is we're going to get a Sharpie in order to be able to mark the chain. Otherwise, I'll forget where to break it. But what we want to do is if we pull this around, and I guess we should talk about the chain tensioner really quickly too. So this chain tensioner, let me see here, we can start with it mostly screwed in all the way. And the idea is, after you attach the chain to it, we can spin this center section. And when I spin the center section, that will either make the ends unscrew so it gets longer, or screw in so it gets tighter. So in this case, actually, what I think we want to do is we want to have them mostly unscrewed. So you can see about how much I have it unscrewed right now. Because usually when we attach the chain is going to be a little bit loose, and we're going to want to tighten it. So you want to unscrew it about this much, and then we're going to pull this in. Oh, and actually, one more thing, which might have happened to you already when I said to unscrew it. So if we unscrew this, if you go too far, the pieces will fall out. Okay, and right now it's not so bad because you can just screw them back in one at a time. Once the chain's attached, though, we have to screw them in kind of at the same time. So the other thing is, if this comes apart, one of these screws is a normal thread, which means to tighten it, you go to the right and it screws in. And one of them is a reverse thread, which means you have to turn it to the left to tighten it. And so if you're trying to screw this back in and it's just not working, you can try spinning the other way. And if that's not working, it means your coupler is probably facing the wrong way. So flip the coupler around and then try forwards and backwards again. So this one now will screw in for me. And that means this one is the reverse thread. So I have to actually screw this one in, I think, going backwards. So we're going to pretend we're unscrewing it. And there we go. Yes. OK. So we want it to be unscrewed where you have about this much left, because we want most of our adjustment to be tightening it. OK, so we'll make sure this is on the sprocket here. And we're going to pull it around until it starts getting tight. And I want this, remember, I want this mostly unscrewed, but I definitely don't want it all the way unscrewed, because we do want to be able to make it a little bit looser and a little bit tighter as we go. So we're going to just pull the chain down until it lines up. And so it looks to me like if I pull the chain tight, I should be able to connect right on this pin. So let me go ahead and mark that with a Sharpie. And I'm just going to try to get as much on there as possible so that I don't lose track of it. So I think if I break on that pin, that would take the inside link out and leave me with the outside links to connect to the chain tensioner. And as I pull this tight, and you want to watch too, there will be the arm moving, right, can really put a bow in this chain. So you do got to tug on it a little bit, or you can have somebody kind of help you by pushing the arm back a little bit into a position where that's a little bit tighter. But that looks good. That looks like if I break it right on that point, I should be able to connect it. And remember, I can always extend the chain a little bit in order to get it to grab. All right, so let's take this off, and now we have our mark for where we're going to try to break the chain. Although now I have to find it again. There it is. All right, so my mark is here. And what we can do too is let's check to make sure that we are both doing the same thing, that you have the same thing that I have. And so if I start with a tape measure, I'm going to start on the chain, not the end of the chain tensioner. So I'll line this end up basically with the end of my chain piece that is connected to the chain tensioner. And if I come all the way down to this side, it looks like I'm at about 52 and maybe 5/8. And it's pretty hard to measure chain accurately because it likes to move around on you, and we really just care about the number of links. But yeah, I would say that that is just under 52 3/4 when everything is lined up correctly. So if your chain is around 52 3/4, then we probably have the same length chain, and you're definitely good to cut it. If not, if yours is much different, go back, measure it again, and mark it again, and make sure it's in the right spot. All right, so now we have to break this chain, and the first step is the same as what we did before. So we're going to drop it in so that that Sharpie mark is going to catch on the pin, is going to line up with the pin that pushes through. And then we can tighten this one just to help hold the chain in place. All right, and then we're going to tighten this one to push the pin out. We want it nice and tight into the screw because that worked last time. So then I'll loosen this up. And you have to loosen this one up because otherwise the pin on the tool will hold the chain together. So we'll do it until that's out. And hopefully this comes free. It does. So this chain we're going to need for our second chain in a second. But now we can detach this. And we are ready to connect the whole thing together. Oh, nope. So what happened there was I pushed too far and this pin came out. Yep, so I had to put this link in to kind of support it and hold it with the needle nose pliers and sort of get the pin started. As long as you get the pin started back in that hole, I think we're going to be okay. But that's why you want to make sure this is screwed all the way in and then learn how much to push on it to keep that pin from falling all the way out. It makes life much more difficult if you have to fix that. All right, the next thing we have to do is we're going to lay this in, again, just where we did the first time to be able to push the pin back through. So we'll drop that in here. And then our next thing that we want to look at is we want to make sure there's no twists in the chain. So my chain is laid out nice and smooth. And then I'm going to bring the connector here, or our tensioner here, and you can see that when I drop this in, the chain is going to be a nice loop. If I tried to turn it around, I could get this in, but I'll have a twist in my chain if I did it that way. So make sure there's no twist in the chain, and it's nice and straight coming back over to where we want to line it up. And then once again, we'll take the tensioner here and line that up with the hole. As much as we can. And then we go ahead and start tightening this pin back in. Okay, one more check, make sure everything is still lined up. And that looks good, so we're going to start tightening it in. And then loosen this one up a little bit. It should come free. All right, and that is looking good. And you can see when I turn it on its side here, it's a continuous chain with no twists or flips in it. So this chain is ready to go. And you can see now because this is connected on both sides of the chain, spinning this thing in the middle will loosen or will tighten both directions or loosen both directions. So one of the things that we should have done before we connect it together was probably make sure that both of these sides are evenly attached. You can see right now this one's screwed in all the way. That one has a small gap. That's going to probably be OK for us. But it's better if they both run out of space at the same time, because now this little bit of tightening, I can't use that. So there's no way for me to tighten that last little bit in. But we'll see if this works or not. If it doesn't work, we'll have to take this tensioner off and then reattach it, which is something I'm going to show you how to do anyway. All right, so I have this loosened up, so there's a decent amount of the screws showing, but not enough to where it's going to fall off. And we're going to bring this chain back to our robot. And I think this top sprocket, we have the washer holding it on, but this bottom sprocket, we don't have that yet. So if you put this on the top sprocket, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the tensioner is somewhere right around this plate. I think we want it to be in the middle of the chain run here. Okay, and then you can put the sprocket on the other side and then line that sprocket up with our shaft here and get that to go back on. Okay, and you might have to, if the hexes aren't lining up, you can see I can rock the arm back and forth to get that whole thing to twist. All right, so now that's in position. What we want to do is start turning our chain tensioner to tighten. And you can see as I'm tightening this up, we have now found a place where the chain is pretty tight. And I would say you want to tighten this not as hard as you possibly can by hand, but decently close to that. You want these chains to be really decently tensioned. You can see if you give it a little pluck, they should vibrate around kind of quickly like that. If they're a little loose, it's OK. But the chain will run a little bit cleaner and a little bit better if we have the right tension here. And you don't want to over-tension it. You can over-tension it, and that will put extra stress on the chain. So you can see if I tighten it to where I'm kind of like happy with it, like that, feels pretty good. If I sort of squeeze on the middle as hard as I can just about make it touch. All right, then this thing can still rotate. So we have to stop this from rotating. And the way to do that is you now tighten these nuts into it. So we'll spin both of them in. And right now, I'm going to do it by hand. But at some point, you're probably going to want to get the 2 wrenches that you need and use the wrenches to just give it a little extra tug so it for sure stays locked in and doesn't move. And remember, again, one of the nuts is going to be reverse threaded, so you're going to spin it the opposite direction that you expect. And before we do anything else, let's go ahead and swing the arm. So you can see I can go all the way up here till it hits. And the arm actually never goes this high. So we're checking to see if the chain tensioner runs into either sprocket. Because if it does, we're in a bad spot. Then I'm going to swing it all the way down and around this way. And we're going to go all the way up until it hits. And it's never going to go this far either. So this is never getting close to or hitting either of the sprockets. So we know our chain tensioner's in a good spot. And we can go ahead and attach this sprocket permanently on this side. Now, I think we put some of these 1032 socket head screws in earlier. And that's what we used up at the top. But I think the bill of materials might ask for a 1032 button head. It doesn't really matter which one you get or use, as long as it grabs the washer. But I'll go ahead and put a button head in on this side. So we'll line that up and screw the screw in. There we go. Okay, we can just make that one nice and tight. And you might need to hold onto the arm to keep it from rotating. But now this sprocket can't fall off because the washer's holding it. This one can't fall off because we got a washer up here. And then we've got that chain connected. So that's one side. We are now going to flip the robot around, repeat the exact same process on the other side. All right, so my second chain is done, and I did say I would show you if this falls off now, right? If I have this unscrewed too far and it falls off now, first of all, if you had a twist in your chain, you got to do that, and then we have to put it back together. But Again, the problem is if I screw this on one side first, and is this the forward or the reverse thread side? It is the forward side. Okay, there we go. Right, if I screw this one on first, there's no way for me to screw this one on afterwards. So the best way to do this is to try to screw these in at the same time. The second best way is to just barely get this one started, and then go ahead and get the other side going afterwards. Then we'll miss a couple of threads on one side, but you can see if I screw this all the way in, right? On this side, we're out of space. On this side, we have about the same amount that we had as an issue on our last one. So that will work. That should be close enough for what we need here. But if you can hold both of these in at the same time, and generally you probably are going to want another person here to do this, but if you can hold both of those in at the same time and have another person spin that spacer in the middle, that standoff in the middle, then I can get them started at the same time. And I think what that means is when this screws in all the way, they're both a little bit closer. This one is just a little bit, looser than the other side. But we have basically all of our adjustment ability now. All right, so I'm going to screw this back so that it is relatively big, but not falling off. And then we are going to put this on our sprockets here. So again, I'm going to aim to put that tensioner somewhere in the middle of the space that we've got here. And I like it on the bottom, although I think it would probably also work on the top. And then for me, the easiest way is to put the chain on the sprocket and then line that sprocket up with the axle down here. And if we can get it twisted in the right spot, it should just drop right on there. Where do we need to be? Should be somewhere around here. Okay, and if you kind of can't get it to go like I can't here, I'm going to just move my sprocket over a little bit because the hexes might not be lining up. So let's try. There we go. So I just moved it over another tooth on the chain. Just kind of took it out, turned it one tooth, put it back in, and now it lines up. That's the spot we were looking for. Okay, and then we have to tension the chain. So I'm going to start twisting it, and it will start getting tight. And again, decently tight by hand. You can see squeezing it together, they get close. That feels pretty good to me. So now I'm going to finger tighten these bolts in, or these nuts in, so they're right against the standoff. So it can't move. And then let's go ahead and put our bolt and washer down here so that the sprocket can't fall off. And I'll switch this one out to a button head since I grabbed one. And let's give it one more turn. And now we'll check kind of the whole arm here and make sure the arm can still smoothly rotate all the way through where we want it to go. And that is good, nice and smooth. Tensioners don't hit anything. I don't feel any snags or hiccups in the chain. It means the chain is in good shape. All right, so that looks good. We are set with our chain now. I guess it's time to start working on the next bit of structure for the arm. All right, the next two pieces we have to make are the second set of arms. So on our robot frame that's here, we're going to have two more arms that connect to this, the other side of our hinges here reaching out. So we're going to have a couple of those pieces that stick out, and those are going to be, I think, 17.5 inches. And then we're going to have a cross piece that holds them together. So see how this one sort of is like an H shape, although the crossing piece is not remotely close to the center. We're going to make another H shape where the crossing piece is a little bit closer to the center. And to find the width of our crossing piece, we'll actually measure this one because we want our next section to be just as wide as the first section that we already built. So first step is to make 2 of those 17.5 inch arms. Oh, and I got a lot of burrs on this, so let me grab a file. We always want to make sure that you're measuring from a cleaned off edge, because otherwise, if you measure to the burr, your dimension will not be what you want. So we'll get this edge cleaned off. All right, that seems pretty good. And let's go ahead and measure. We're looking for 17.5 inches here. So we'll bring this into 17.5, and we will make a mark. So half is right here. So I think the end of my little check mark is right at a half. Perfect. And let's transfer that line across the whole thing. And then we'll double check, because Sharpie lines are kind of thick. It's hard to know exactly where the right spot is, but I would say yes, if we remove the whole line, we should be right on. All right, that looks pretty close. And let's clean this up and see how we did. And we are 17, and that is pretty darn close to a half. So we're good with the first one. And since we want 2 of these pieces that are as close to the same length as possible, we're going to go ahead and clean the other edge off. And I'm going to use this one to mark this one. So we end up with 2 that are the same. So we'll square them up at the back. And then a line going across there. And that should be good. You can always double check, make sure we didn't do something crazy. It looks like it's 17.5. So we'll go ahead and clamp this one up. Okay, that looks good. All right, are they the same length? That is close enough for me. All right, so these two pieces are ready and they are cut. The last piece I said we want to measure based on the robot. So these two pieces are going to attach onto the hinges like this. And then we're going to need a piece that goes across the middle to connect them together. And we want the width of that to basically be whatever this width is down here. So we'll measure on the robot. What is our gap? And I would say that it is 14 and, let's look up here too. I would say we're 14 and a half plus maybe a 16th. Yeah, 14 and a half plus a 16th. So 14 and 9/16 is the goal. And just like when we did this piece, remember it fits snugly down here, but up at the top we had a little bit more room. Well, in this case, if we make the piece a little bit too long, it's fine. It just means that when we attach these vertical pieces on here, instead of being perfectly centered, they're just going to be off center by a tiny bit. And it's still going to work fine. We're still going to have room to put those holes in. So doesn't have to be exact, but we want to keep it as close as we can. So let's clean this end off so we can measure. Okay, 14 and a half. Plus a 16th. So 14 and a half, and then it's the one line past that. So that looks pretty good. Let's get our line transferred all the way here. And let's see. So 14 and a half plus a 16th, it's right on the edge of that Sharpie line, so we're going to cut right to the inside edge of that Sharpie line. I guess it's going to be the outside because I'm going to clamp the bigger piece up in the saw. Yeah, that's it. Clamp it up. Let's do it. Let's check if it's the right length. 14 and a half plus a 16th, perfect. All right, I'm going to finish filing this piece off, and then we'll clean up the table. All right, and of course, we are about to assemble this, so we're probably not going to mix up the parts, but we're always going to label them, especially if it's the end of your meeting and you're going to put them on a shelf. You want to come back tomorrow or whenever your next meeting is and not have to guess at what everything is. So our short one is 03, because 03 is the code for the arm section. And this one is called arm cross, because it goes across the robot. And these two are both 03, and they are called arm main link. And we'll just get both of these labeled. Okay. Now that they're labeled, we're going to take the cross one and set that off on the side for a minute. And we're going to work on our arm main links. Now, for the arm main links, we want to have kind of a top, and we're going to say the writing is the top, because right now it doesn't matter. So these are my tops. And eventually, right, this is all going to get connected together like this. We're going to have these T gussets on top and underneath to hold everything together. But on the end of the arm, we're going to have holes that will match up with the intake. So we've got these big polycarbonate plates that you can buy that will slide in, and we want to be able to build the entire intake, line it up, and attach it quickly and easily. And the problem is if we take the whole intake with everything attached to it, it gets pretty heavy. So clamping that in place and having it stay in place so we can drill the holes and rivet it together is actually pretty difficult. But there is a trick that we can do, and that is the hole spacing on those plates is the same as the hole spacing on this bracket. So the first 4 holes on this T bracket actually line up with the holes on those plates. So we can use these brackets before we attach them here and don't have them anymore. We can use them on our main links. If I clamp it right on the end of the piece and trace those holes, drill those holes through, then we will be ready to go with our assembly later. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So these holes are going to go on the sides of it, so the top should be facing up. And we'll do it one at a time, but we're going to bring this in from the side, and we want this to be flat on the table, and we want it to be flat on the edge. So I can bring in my square just to make sure they're perfectly level there. Now in this position, this is where we want it to be, so I'm going to go ahead and get a clamp on here. And that will work easier if I'm off the edge of the table, so we'll slide it over. Okay, so we get this clamp on. And we moved a little bit. All right, I'm going to loosen that clamp, and we're going to try it one more time. Bring this in. Make sure we're nice and flat on there. Okay, yep, that feels better. Then we'll go ahead and bring the clamp back in. Tighten that one down. All right, and then we're going to try to get a second clamp on here as well. And I think I'll go out towards, well, I'll go to the other side here. Tighten that one down. Just want to make sure it still feels like it's even on the edge here. And that's pretty good. Okay, yep, that feels like that's in a pretty good spot, so this one's good. And we're going to clamp the other one up, and then we'll head over to the drill press and do both of them at once. So the other arm main link, another T bracket, and again, we'll square that up with the edge of the piece. Bring in our clamp here. Okay, that all feels good. So let's get the second clamp on. All right, see, these are both set. We're ready to head over to the drill press, put our holes in them, and then we'll come back and do our assembly. Okay, so we are going to add the holes into our pieces. It is a 3/16 hole to line up here. So I've got my 3/16 drill bit, and I'm going to go ahead and start out by putting that into the chuck here. All right, that looks good. And then, well, okay, this is a little bit of a problem. I think this clamp is keeping me from getting close enough to do what we need to do here. So I think I'm going to loosen this clamp up, and I'm going to carefully move it. I'm going to go all the way over to this end as well. So we'll have both of the clamps kind of hanging out on this end. Okay, that seems good. Now, we are going to be drilling the first hole, this one here, the third one, and the fourth one, but we do not need to do this last hole. That one won't line up with anything, so we don't need to drill that one. All right, then, let me see, I'm going to have to adjust my table. Like, I can rotate the table away a little bit and bring this in, and hopefully that will let me get this last hole here too. Yeah, so I can get to that one in kind of this setup. So I'll go ahead and clamp this in. I'm going to just get as close to that clamp as I can when I tighten the vise on it. And it seems like the table over here, I should be good to find most of those spots. So I will lock the table. All right, and then we're going to look to line up on one of our holes. That looks like I'm right on that hole. So we will go ahead now and clamp our vise down. Still looks good. Yep, looks good to me. Let's do it. All right, and with these holes, we want to go all the way through because we're going to have stuff on both sides where we want to attach it. So that was the first hole. Let's get the second one here. That looks good. And that looks good. Okay, now I'm going to undo the vise a little bit and slide this one out and try to pick that hole up. I might not have to move the vise because they should be lined up. That looks good. So go ahead and tighten that down. We'll do it one more time. All right, and I will mention too, if you don't have a drill press for this step, just drill through one wall, not both walls of the box. Then we'll be able to attach the intake on one side, and we'll be able to use the intake to make sure that the holes line up on the other side. All right, we have one more hole that we have to get to, and this hole is going to be a little bit more difficult to get to. So we are probably going to have to, let me see, I'll try to add this clamp over here instead. All right, and anytime you're moving the clamps like I just did, definitely look at the holes and make sure they haven't moved. So all three of my holes are still lining up, so I'm ready to try to figure out how I can line my drill press up to drill that last hole. It's a little tricky because it's all the way on the end. And I can't go any farther in because eventually our clamps are going to hit. So that's about as far in as we can go. So I'll clamp that into the, hold on, it feels like there might be some shavings that I'm sitting on here. I see. Make sure you're not clamping on that hole unless you have filed that hole or cleaned that hole off, because that will make it sit crooked. So I'm going to slide in till that hole is right there. And now we're nice and flat. And then, let's see, can we shift this? If I loosen the table again, can I get far enough over to where we can drill that hole? Looks like just barely. All right. That moved a lot. Okay. So this looks like a pretty good spot. Let me lock the table in before I forget. And let's see. Okay, that looks like it's in a good spot there. It looks like maybe I can clamp here to hold it in place. That looks good. All right, the one thing too that we have to be careful of here is because we're not drilling into the table, when we push down on this, the whole thing is gonna bend a little bit in that direction. So I am gonna have my hand on here helping to hold this down so it doesn't tip. And I'm gonna drill really gently. I'm not gonna pull down hard. I'm gonna let the drill cut through because if this bends down, then our hole might end up being crooked. And we want this hole to be as straight as we can make it. So I'll hold on tight and we'll just go nice and slow. All right, first one is good. And if some of these holes don't line up perfectly, we will be able to make them a little bit bigger in the step where we're attaching them. But mine looks pretty good, so I'm going to set this one aside. We're going to do the exact same thing now for our second one here. All right, go ahead and get these unclamped. Now we've got all the holes drilled. Okay, and we got to clean these holes up. So we can go in there with your choice deburring tool, countersink bit. Actually, like for these little holes, I like spinning the big drill bit by hand. And the back is where we really need to clean it up. Perfect. Okay. We need to arrange these now so our tops are back on top, right? And eventually our intake is going to connect here going out this way. But our goal now is to turn this into that H frame where we can take the whole thing and attach it to the robot at once. So the way that we're going to do this, though, is we're going to use the same T-brackets, and they don't line up on the end here. Instead, this time, they're going to line up a certain amount in from the end. So let me grab the calipers for this. And what we'll do is we'll scribe a line, the correct distance in from the edge of the piece, and that is where we will line our plates up. So the first thing is if you are using these T-brackets, these are the Andy Mark T-brackets, then it's going to be 3 inches from the end of the piece without the holes, the side without the holes, to the T-bracket is going to be 3 inches. If you are not using the Andy Mark T-brackets, then to the center of where the arm is going to attach, or to the edge of where the arm is going to attach, this distance should be, I believe, 5 inches. So we'll set it up with the 3 inches because we have the Andy Mark brackets, and that makes it a little bit easier to measure. So I will take my calipers and set them to 3 inches here. All right, 3.010, close enough. And all I'm going to do is scribe from the end. We know 3 inches is going to be somewhere around here, so we'll make a darkened area. And again, this Sharpie that I'm putting on to scratch off, if you can just see the scribe line, you don't need to do the Sharpie step. I think it shows up better on camera when I do, so I'm going to kind of do that for every step where we're scribing. Okay, so that is sort of the line. It's I don't know if that was me or if that was, okay, so my Sharpie coloring was not even, but that line is good. So we've got that line that is 3 inches in from the end. And we started again on the side without the holes. The holes are far away. And we're going to take this plate now, and that plate should line up right on that line. Okay, and you might want to set it up on the table, again, if your table is nice and flat. Sometimes if your table is not good, what you can do is we have that 2-inch box, but you could set this up on that. Let's pretend this was a 1x2 box. You could set it up on that, so you're on top of that nice flat piece of metal, and then the same basic idea will work, which is that this is holding this piece and the bracket flat on the bottom edge. And I am going to just line it up on the line as best I can. That looks like it's a good spot, so let's go ahead and clamp it into place. Clamp on that side, make sure it's still nice and flat, and we'll do 1 clamp on this side. All right, so that is where I think it's going to go. We're going to double check now, though. So the edge of this cross piece here should be 5 inches when this is perfectly lined up. And we can just kind of check that with a tape measure. So they come in this way. Yep, that looks like it's as close to 5 inches, right? So I trust my scribe mark more than the tape measure, but that looks pretty good to 5. If you wanted to use the scribe mark to get holes to line up for a not Andy Mark bracket, what you could do is, if it's 5 inches to the edge of the piece of box, if I set my calipers to 5.5, that would line up with these center holes here. And so any T-bracket that you're using, those center holes will line up. So if I did a scribe line there, I would just move until this hole was lined up on that scribe line. But this looks good for me. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and drill and rivet those holes in place. Once again, we want the 3/16 drill bit. Okay, and let's do it. And we're only going through one wall. We're not going to drill all the way through. So just go through the first wall and then stop. Okay, and then we'll rivet that. Next hole. And then the last one we can get to without moving the clamps. And you could, if you wanted to, right? We could have done this on the drill press and then drilled the holes all the way through. I think for me, it's a lot faster to just use the hand drill. And since we can't be positive that we're drilling straight through with the hand drill, what we'll do is we'll line the other bracket up on the other side the same way, and then we'll just drill those separately when we get to the other side. All right, so those are good. We can now do the other two holes that we couldn't get to before. And again, I can do this over the table because I'm stopping when I go through the first wall. I can't possibly drill into the table unless I go way too much. All right, and we'll get a rivet in there. And last one. Okay, so that was the first side of this one done. Now we're going to flip it over. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So in this case, we'll use our boxes again because they're here. And I've got my 3 inches already set. So let's go ahead and color in roughly the right area. Very roughly the right area. All right. Now it should be good. Eventually, I'm just going to color the entire thing black with Sharpie, and then no matter where I scribe, I'm good. All right, so we've got our scribe line. That is where we want to line up this new bracket. So I'll take that right over to the line. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. Just get it as close as you can. And again, I'm holding everything down against the aluminum box, the extra aluminum box that we have here. And then fortunately for me, the clamp has to get a little bigger because we have the plate on the back side. But we will get that lined up. Clamp one side in. And then same thing on the other side. Push down, make sure everything is nice and flat. Perfect, and you can see kind of how well you did. These should line up with each other. And so if it looks like they're in the same place, then we are good to go. And so we'll start drilling the next set of holes. So we've got the 3 in the middle that we can do, just like the first side. Okay, so we have our whole first side done. And if we follow the same set of steps on our second side, our second arm link, then we'll be ready to, like basically everything will be in place, so it'll be really easy for us to just slide this in between them, clamp it together, square it up a little bit, and attach it. So we're going to do the same thing on our second arm link. But remember, when we take the 3 inches and scribe the 3 inches here, make sure that you're doing that on the side that is away from the holes. We have those holes on the front, and our 3 inches needs to be on the side away from those holes. Wow, I missed by even more that time. All right, it's fine. All right, so we get our 3-inch scribe line on. Double check that, again, the holes are on one side, the scribe line's on the other. And the scribe line is on top, right? It's not even on the same side because, again, we need the plates to be on top and bottom and the holes to be on the side. If you've got that lined up, the last thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the next bracket, if you kind of put the pieces together like this, the brackets should be pointing towards each other. So if I attach it this way, we're still probably okay. It just means that our top is going to become the bottom. which is not a big deal, but I'm going to make sure this is pointing towards it. And then we're basically going to repeat the process that we did on this one a second time. OK, so finish the second one. You can see if I line them up, my two T brackets are just about in exactly the same spot on both sides, so I'm pretty happy with that. Another thing to think about is we're using the table kind of to align stuff, which means as we work and we collect all of these shavings, if I tried to put something flat on the table, it's not going to sit flat when all of these metal bits are there. So we have been cleaning up the table a lot, usually after each step, usually off camera. And in part, that's to make everything look a little nicer. But it's also because you want a nice clean table when you are going to align your stuff and use it as an assembly table. So I'll clean it back off, and now we're ready to move on to the next step. And I think I said these were my tops, so I'll stick with that, even though whether that's the top or the bottom doesn't really matter right now. And our last step here is to take our arm cross piece, and it's just going to slide in between those brackets that we put on. And we're going to clamp this in place. We can still squeeze these brackets down to hold everything together, but we're going to just take a second here first to try to square everything up as much as possible. Okay, that looks like we should be able to find something that's pretty square. This side is nice because it's a little tight, so it's kind of holding on for me, acting a little bit like a clamp. I'm going to actually flip this around so I can bring that edge off the table a little bit to get our clamps on it. And if you need to, if stuff is falling, obviously it's easy to have another person kind of hold on to it. Or you could get a clamp and hold it to the table with a clamp. All right, so let's get this one side going first. So we don't need that other side there yet. Let's square it up as much as we can. And then I am going to try to make sure it stays aligned with the T bracket as much as possible, too. All right, one more time on the square. Okay, that is pretty square. You go ahead and tighten this clamp down the rest of the way. And then same thing on the other side. I'll get it started here. Get the clamp started. And we will do our best to, we're going to start out lined up on the T bracket, which, you know, is probably good enough if we did nothing else, but we will follow up with the square after that. Okay, and following the T bracket is pretty much as square as we're going to be able to get it. So make sure this is snug. Check the square one more time. Looks good. All right, so we are ready to drill these two holes and rivet them. And now, really, it's connected. It can't go anywhere. So we're going to take the clamps off. And let's do the other set of holes on this side. Oh, I was wrong. That's loose enough that it can rotate still. So if that happens to you, we are going to just go ahead and reclamp. I'm going to have to move the clamp over a bit, though, so I have room to drill. So maybe I'll go right next to the first rivet over here. And again, before we continue, let's get back to square, because I'm sure it's not. All right, so that is squared up. Tighten this back down. and we'll do the second hole. All right, and we'll do the same thing on the other side as well. Get the clamp started out of the way of where we want to drill our second hole. Let's get in here and square it up. Perfect. Now we can for sure take the clamps off because we got 2 rivets in holding it in place. And we're going to flip it over, and we're just going to attach the other side. Okay. Okay, and if your brackets on this side don't align perfectly, like mine is just a little bit off that way, trust the fact that we squared it up more than the bracket position, because again, we marked these separately and tried to align them and clamp them, and if they moved a little bit, you know, that's okay. That's part of the reason why the position isn't super critical there, because that middle box can sort of adjust to it. All right, finish it up. All right, so this section is now complete. We're going to clean up, get rid of some of this stuff that we don't need, and then we will attach this to the rest of the robot. All right, so we have the piece that we were just working on. We've got a short side to our H and a long side. The long side should have all of those holes on the sides, on that side and on this side. All right, so the other thing on our robot is, right, we know these hinges are here, and we know these are going to attach to those hinges. I think the easiest position to attach it in is actually where I have it, where it's turned all the way up into our top crossbeam and sort of locked in place. But it still can kind of move around a bit, so I am going to just really quickly take a clamp. I think we did this in the last video too. I'm going to just clamp it in place so it isn't going to move on me. Then this top crossbeam is going to sit right on top of the other 1x2 box that's here, and that actually should work with this hinge attaching because we'll always rotate away and we never actually open all the way back up again. So we can just go ahead and go right flat on top of it. The other thing you'll notice as you're putting yours here and aligning it, like mine, if I line it up perfectly on one side, it is just a hair wide on the other side, which means that this crossbeam was just a tiny bit longer than it should have been. And that's totally fine, because you can see when we flip the hinges up, they're both still going to line up. We still have plenty of room to drill and attach them. OK, so our first step here is going to be to flip this one up. And we're going to get one clamp up at the top here. And a regular C-clamp should work, but I think from my experience, this one also, because it's squishy, had been working really well. And I just want to make sure that I really want to be just a tiny bit off the edge for mine, because I know mine's a little bit too long. So I'll try to feel how much it's off the edge and balance it out so I'm sticking off the same amount on both sides. It's not super critical that you get it perfectly centered. but that feels pretty good. All right, and that's doing a good job of kind of holding it in place for me. So now I'll go ahead and get another clamp. Looks like for this one we will go with a C clamp. And we'll put a clamp on this side as well. Just again, trying to keep it as centered as I can. That feels pretty good. And actually, it's clamped on, so I'm going to be able to gently just make sure it can rotate. You want to go very gently because the clamps are certainly not holding it as well as the rivets that we are going to put in. And we're going to go ahead and put our rivets in now. It looks like, so this clamp can't rotate, and we can't really clamp on the side this time. So yeah, we're going to go with just the one clamp on each side, and that should be enough to hold it in place. So we'll drill this bottom hole here. And maybe if you're a little shorter or something and this is too tall for you, standing on a little stool or a box is okay. But if you do want to rotate this around and try to clamp it up in this position somewhere else where the arm rotates, that's fine. This position works for me. As with like kind of everything we do, there are more than one correct ways to assemble the robot or to build the robot. So if this is not working for you and you need it lower down, you can rotate this around, find another spot, and get it clamped up. And we are going to do a rivet again. Just get the rivet right in the hole. And as a general rule, we're going to start with rivets everywhere on the robot because rivets are lighter, and it's always good to save weight, especially up high on the robot. But if stuff starts loosening up, for example, if you start driving around and practicing with this robot, and these rivets start loosening up or breaking, and you can feel this hinge getting sloppy and loose, you can try to re-rivet it, and if it holds the second time, you're good. But if it really starts loosening up again, then the solution is rivets are maybe not strong enough for this particular location on the robot. So go ahead and drill all the way through, or in this case, you'll have to reach inside, but you can replace those rivets with a number 10 bolt because it's the same size hole, and really it doesn't take any other changes other than, in this case, you'll have to drill all the way through the box, I think, or you'll have to open up the back side of the box to be able to reach the nut in or the bolt in. But yeah, so if it's too weak, just swap it out for bolts. Let's do our other rivet hole, though. Other side. I'm going to come around. Okay, it is fully riveted. Let's go ahead and make sure the hinges are fine through the whole travel. Yep, looks good. All right, and the other thing we can check right now before we move on is, let me bring the robot back a little bit from the table here. And so this actually is going to start folded up, and then we can bring it down past this back mid crossbeam. And this is sort of the position the robot is going to go through. It's going to go like this. But we don't want this to lock out when we start lifting up like this. We don't want it to be locked out. It's going to be not in the right position to score. And if it stays locked out like that, when we come into the robot, there will not be enough room for the intake in there. So we need to find some way to control the position of this section, of this second arm section here. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to turn this into essentially what we call a 4-bar linkage. And if you imagine, if there was a piece that was connected from this arm crossbeam back up to this main, I guess that was the top crossbar on the robot, if we keep this dimension always the same length, then as this moves in, right, as this moves in, the arm gets lower. And so in order to make this dimension stay the same, this has to tip up. So basically, as the arm goes in, this is going to be tipping up in order to match. And then when it goes out, it's going to be tipping down in order to keep that dimension the same. And so by using that extra linkage here, we're going to create a 4-bar, and that's going to let us control the positioning of our gripper at the end of this. So that, I think, is our next step. So we're going to go ahead and move the robot out of the way. We're going to bring out a giant sheet of polycarbonate and get that cut down and put our 4th bar of our 4-bar linkage together. All right, we need to take a piece of this giant polycarbonate sheet, and we need to make it 10 inches by 23 inches. There are lots of ways you can do that. First of all, if you're lucky and you're buying this sheet from somebody that's happy to cut it for you, do that. Ask for a 10-inch strip, and then you can cut just the 23 inches out of it. Or if they'll cut the whole 10 inches by 23 inches for you, even better. There's a good chance, depending on where you buy this, you might end up with a smaller sheet. You might be able to get a 2-foot by 2-foot or 4-foot by 4-foot sheet of polycarbonate. But we ended up with a full 4x8 sheet, which is how they come. And yeah, it's kind of unwieldy and hard to deal with. So smaller pieces are good as long as you can fit what you want. Now, you can cut this in a variety of ways. If you have a table saw, that's fine. If you have a circular saw, you can use the circular saw to cut it. If you have a hand saw, you can cut it with the hand saw. I'm going to show you kind of the easiest low tool method to use. So the first thing that we're going to do, though, is we need to mark where we want to cut. And so I am going to be using a big T-square. It's like a drywall square or something, I think. So if you have one of these, that's great. If you don't, you can use your smaller square, and then if you just have a big piece of aluminum left over, you'll be able to make it work with that. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and we're going to line it up on our polycarbonate sheet here. First, we'll go this way. And we're going to look to make a mark at 10 inches. We're going to try to do a 10-inch strip here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10 is right here. And usually I'll do a second mark just to make sure that we're generally straight with what we're working with. So we'll do another one right around there, and we'll see how those two line up. If I take this whole thing off the end, I should be able to get it to line up on those two marks pretty close, close enough for me. And I will draw a line. Okay. So now it's marked. And the way we're going to cut this is with a razor blade. And if you score it a few times, you can usually get it to snap and break off. So I'm going to take the end of this T off so it's not in the way of where I'm cutting. And again, if you have a nice long ruler like this or a flatter piece, it's a little bit easier to get the razor blade around it. If you don't, you can clamp a box on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically bring this to the edge of my table here. And we're going to put it just off the edge, just off the front of the table. And once I get this one close, I'm going to keep the my square, or it's just a big ruler now. Let's get a couple of these on the line, because I'm going to use that line or the ruler to help guide where our blade ends up. And I'm going to clamp everything down to the table here. little bigger. All right. And we'll probably have to do this a couple times to align it up. Again, if you got multiple people, you can sort of be manhandling both sides of it. But we'll work it until it's in the right spot. Okay. So there is the other side. So we'll just match this up on the line, be right off the edge of the table, and clamp this one on. Okay, and we want to clamp on nice and tight with those. And then you can see the bow of this is creating some problems. Okay, so I'm going to also put some clamps on the back to hopefully stop it from doing that quite as badly. And I would also recommend having another person kind of support it in the back while you go through this whole process. Okay, and for this step, or for this method, we can't be on the ground. You can mark it all on the ground, but we need the edge of the table to actually be able to break it at the end of this whole thing. Get this last clamp on here to help try to control the sheet a little bit. Okay. So that looks pretty good. I think we can work with that. Now I'm going to grab my utility knife. And I really, really cannot recommend enough, start with a fresh razor blade. So I'm going to take out the one that I've been using for stuff, and I'm going to put a brand new razor blade in here. Okay, and I'll make sure that's locked in. Now all we're going to do is we are going to run the razor blade. I guess I'll stay on this side. We're going to run the razor blade right along, keeping it on the edge of our ruler or our guide. And when you get to the end here, you might hit this clamp. That's okay. We'll come back and get that end the other direction afterwards. And so that's it. I'm just going to go here. I'm going to push down not too hard because it's more important that I stay right against the ruler. But we are cutting in now as I go through. Staying right along the ruler. Okay. That's about as far as I can get there. I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to do it again. And you should be able to feel it when it starts. It should drop back into that same groove. You should be able to feel it kind of riding in that same groove. So we're cutting that one little slot a little bit deeper every time we do this. And again. And maybe again. And I am pushing down. I'm trying to get some pressure on that to cut it a little bit more. Not pushing down super hard. Okay. Then let's go back and let's get the other side. A few times. That was once. Twice. 3 times. That's 4 and 5. Okay, so if we're lucky, that was deep enough. And I don't really have a good way to let you know when it's deep enough. You can kind of feel in the groove. If the groove's starting to feel like pronounced, then you can give it a try. And this is the hard part. What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically grab onto this, and I'm going to push down more or less as hard as I can, and it should snap. If it doesn't snap, then our groove wasn't deep enough. So let's try it, all right? 1, 2, 3. And there we go. We have our 10-inch strip. I'll cut the backing with my utility knife to free it, because it's just the paper on the back that's holding it together right now. And this is why we needed it clamped off the edge of the table, so you had room for it to bend over and snap, but basically right towards the edge of the table. And now we have a 10-inch strip. We need to get 23 inches out of the 10-inch strip, but we can get rid of this giant thing now, and it gets a little bit more manageable. So give me a second to get this big sheet out of here, and then we'll cut this down to final size. All right, now we just have the 10-inch wide sheet. We can double check that it is 10 inches wide, and we kind of did everything right. And if it's a little bit more or a little bit less than 10 inches, that is okay, especially dealing with this big cut the way that we did. So mine is short, maybe a 1/16 of an inch shorter than 10 inches, no big deal, as long as you are in the ballpark. All right, now we want to do 23 inches going along it. So we'll have a 10 by 23 section. So we'll come out to 23 here and give ourselves a little mark. And yeah, I'll do 2 marks just so we know if it feels way off, if we need to worry. Okay, we'll bring it out this way to our marks. That looks good. And that is the line that we want to do it on. Once again, if you got saws and you want to use saws, that's fine. I'm going to do the same method here that we did before. This is the good side. This is our 10 by 23 side that we are going to use when it's broken in half. And it's a little tricky, right? Because the whole thing is 48. So this side's 23, this side's 25. They're pretty close in dimension. All right, so once again, it's the same exact process. We bring this out to the edge of the table, and we're going to go ahead and clamp this on. Actually, let me show you, if you don't have one of these, and you've marked everything up using a piece of box, let me show you what that would look like. So this is a little bit harder because it's tall, so it's harder to get the razor blade nice and flat against it. But it will still work. All right, so I'll bring this out basically to the edge of the table, line this up so it's right on the line, and let's go ahead and get this clamped on. Nice and tightly on that side. And we'll go nice and tight on this side. And it's the same process, so we are going to just score it. You know, I think last time we did 5 times and it kind of worked, so we'll start there. But instead of being able to go flat against this, I'm going to be on a little bit of an angle, and that's okay. It will mean that my length accuracy suffers a little bit, but as long as it's close to the right size, we're going to be just fine. All right, so we'll start scribing this or scoring this once and twice. And we just keep going. Oop, that one got out of the groove. Let me switch over here. Make sure we're getting both sides. All right, I think we'll give it a try again. Make sure these clamps are really in and really tight. All right, here we go. There it is. And once again, we'll cut the backing material off here so we can be free. And we finally got our piece. All right, so we have our 10 by 23 piece of Lexan or polycarbonate here. And the edges that we cut, we can see some of the problem I was having why it didn't snap actually is that I had 2 different grooves that I was working on. and so it followed one of the grooves but not the other. Sometimes if you have this little bit that's hanging off, I could take this over to the grinder, and I might be able to even that out a little bit. I could file it till it was flat. That'll help a little bit. The flatter this is, the more it'll kind of help in the next step to get everything lined up, but it's okay if it's not perfect. And then even on the other edge, there will be some burrs there. And I really like using the deburring tool. And if you go down the edge that we cut with it, and you might need to peel off some of the plastic first. But if I come down the edge that we cut here with the deburring tool, it doesn't take a lot of force, but once you get it caught in there, you can just run it all the way along the whole edge. You get these excellent long stringy things, and now that's nice and smooth. So we'll get that on the other side too. All right, and then the end we cut on this end, you can really see that one score line was nowhere close. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grind a little bit of this chunky bit that's sticking out here down, and then we'll come back and get our hinges going. All right, that looks good. So I have my one misscore line, but I'm pretty flat on the other line here. So let's go ahead and deburr these ends now. We need one more on this side as well. And if the deburring tool is skating over it like mine is a little bit here, you can always go back and just use a regular file as well. All right, but that looks pretty good. And my polycarbonate fingerprints are on here. Okay. So this is good. We're going to grab the piano hinges and get those prepped next. All right, so now we have our piano hinges. The ones we got came in packaging that looks like this, so maybe you have the same thing. If not, it should be close enough that it will still work. And what we are looking to do is we are looking to have these hinges be attached onto the pieces we just made. But as you can see, the hinges are bigger than the 10 inches of our polycarbonate. And also, they're going to attach in a very specific way. So one's going to be on top, one's going to be below, and we got to make sure we have the point of the hinge in the right spot. But our first problem is we just need to cut these down so they are the same length as our polycarbonate sheet. And they're supposed to be 10 inches long. We can use our polycarbonate sheet to sort of measure it and match it. But if you look at the hinge, if I measure out to 10 inches, 10 inches is going to be lined up basically with one of the gaps here, one of the seams. So it lines up right with this one right here. And when we cut this, we're going to try to cut it right through that gap there. So that's like our goal. And we can see if we lined it up on this, made it flush on one side, that is the nearest hinge. So we can line it up that way as well. So we can do the same thing on this one. So I'll make it flat on this end, and that is the seam that we want to cut it at. So we're going to be cutting it somewhere around here. All right, now here's the problem. If you have a vertical bandsaw like we do, you will be very tempted to walk over there with this and cut it off. And it will probably work, but the metal on the sides of this is fine. The bandsaw will cut that no problems. But this pin in the middle is very, very hard. So right there, it's kind of two sides of the hinge, and then there's this long pin or rod going through the middle. And that pin is very, 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 very hard steel. And I think if you cut it on your bandsaw, like we tested, it was very, very hard to cut, and it will sort of chip the teeth or break the teeth on the bandsaw blade. So if you do cut this on the bandsaw, you're probably going to need to get a new blade. So what we are going to do is we are going to cut it with the hacksaw. If you have a Dremel or if you have a grinder, an angle grinder, that is probably a faster way to make this happen. But if you don't have those things, then the hacksaw is going to be your answer. So we'll do at least the first one here with the hacksaw. Bring it over to the edge of the table. And I'm going to have the part I'm cutting. In this case, this is not super strong, so I want it to be very close to the edge of the table when I clamp this on. And we'll get a clamp on here. And a little more space. I don't want to saw the table. So we'll get that clamp on there. We'll get another clamp on as close as I can here as well. And then we'll see if we want to drop one on the back. We probably do. We kind of need to get one clamp on each side of the hinge because we don't want either side of the hinge to be able to kind of flex and move on us. All right, and then just for extra support, let's get one of our fast ones here, and we'll just kind of clamp it over here. All right, so that feels pretty secure. I think we can go ahead and try to make our cut. And again, with the hacksaw, I'm going to kind of start by pulling back on the blade to try to get myself a little groove going. And I'll use my finger along the side of the blade to just help keep it lined up while we get started. All right, and there we go. And you can see I'm working my way into that gap in between those two hinges. That's where we want to be. All right, and now we're on that hardened steel shaft in the middle. Okay, and that is grabbing on a little bit. Okay, looks good, looks good. And then we just got to get it kind of started again. Okay, that is biting into my hacksaw blade pretty fiercely. So the smartest thing that I think I can do is, instead of trying to fight through that, since the pin is broken, I'm through the pin in the middle, I'm just going to turn around and I'm going to cut this last bit from the other side. Which does mean I got to get it started again. Okay, first one is more or less done. Couple things that we got to look at on it though. Okay, so the first thing is the hacksawing definitely bent this edge. So we are not in great shape on that edge there. You should be able to bend it back. If you can't bend it back by hand, you can grab a pair of pliers and bend out on that just a little bit. And it doesn't have to be perfectly flat, because when we go to attach it onto here or onto the frame, that's going to help also pull it back flat. but I'm just kind of, trying to flatten it out a little bit. Okay, and then of course there are very sharp edges here on the end, especially the corners. So we will file that down. And I like to, on the corner, kind of get a 45-degree angle or a round edge on it so it's not sharp and pointy. Let's clean up the back side too. And then the other corner. Okay, that feels pretty good. You might want to, while you're at it, check the other side because, again, there will be inspectors at the event. They will be looking for sharp edges on your robot. And a lot of times from the factory, these other corners are also pretty sharp. And so just to save yourself the trouble of dealing with it at the event, I would just kind of hit that corner with a little bit of a round or a 45. And now it's much less pokey. Okay, that one looks good. All right, so this is one hinge done. We're going to do the exact same process with the second hinge. But this time, since I have one, I'm going to go ahead and grab my angle grinder, and we'll do this cut a little bit quicker. All right. Yeah, power tools are great. But of course, it works just fine with the hacksaw too. And same deal, let's clean it up. All right, that's both hinges ready to go. Now let's get them attached to our polycarb. Okay, so we've got our two 10-inch hinges now, or ish, and our polycarbonate sheet. And if you look at the hinges, let me move the sheet out of the way so it's not shiny. There is a side where this section is bumped up, and then the other side, right, where it's bumped down. And the side where it's bumped down, it looks pretty smooth coming through the transition here. But on this side, you can definitely see there's a pronounced bump where that pin is going through the middle of everything, or that shaft is going through the middle of everything. So flip both of your hinges so that the bump is facing up, like this. And then on our polycarbonate sheet, what we're going to do is we're going to have one of them going under. And it basically, you can slide it in until it's touching, because the hinge will still be able to kind of rotate. You might just leave the teeniest of space between that middle bump and the polycarb. But for the most part, yeah, I'm going to have mine touching. Then on this side, it goes on top. So we're going to have one side where it goes under, one side where it goes on top, but both of the bumps need to be facing up in the same direction. All right, so I'm going to just let's attach this side first. And I think if I bring it off the edge of the table, I can get some clamps on here. I'm just keeping it lined up with the edges of the plate. All right, let's get the drill. And we're going to drill through the metal side first so we can find the holes. And we're just going to go right through the polycarb, and then, yeah, we'll rivet it in place. Remember, though, we're not drilling into the box now, so definitely don't have your fingers underneath where we are about to drill. All right, so metal side through. And we have a couple options for this one. And we might have to change this later, but I'm pretty sure we have room to put this side's rivets in from either direction. And it turns out the head of the rivet is nicer going against the plastic. And then the metal can kind of handle the ball spreading out better than the plastic would, because the ball can dig into the plastic. So there's a couple of things to think about. If we wanted to put this from the metal side through, Then on the other side, a trick that you can do is if you use some number 10 washers, you could put the washer on, and it will actually pinch down on the washer and spread the force out on the plastic so it's a little bit better. But in this case, I think we have clearance to put the rivet in from the plastic side first. And so that's what we're going to do on this one. We're going to drill from the metal side, then we're going to flip it over and put the rivet in from the plastic side. And when we go to assemble the whole thing on the robot, we'll find out if our rivets are sticking out too far or not. I don't think they will. All right, so let's rivet this one. And then we flip it back over and drill again. And then back over to rivet. Now, on this one, I was a little bit farther away from the clamp there, and you can see it is collecting some junk inside here. So I have some shavings of the polycarb, and that's going to stop this from sitting flat. So if that happens to you, it's on my second hole, so I can actually take this clamp off and brush it off. If it was on your first hole and you didn't want to move anything, you can try to reach in there with something like a punch or something flat and sort of scrape that stuff out. But since we have the option of removing this clamp and making sure it sits nice and flat, we're good. So then, again, from the plastic side, we can put this one in. Okay, and we'll flip it over. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'll put this clamp back on just to try for that not to happen. The tighter it's clamped together, the more likely it is for those shavings and pieces to end up through the other side. So while the pieces, we have two rivets in, the pieces can't move, I still want to keep them clamped together so they don't spread out in this case. Just because both of these are extra flexible compared to what we have normally been attaching together. All right, so let's do another hole here. And that one seemed like everything came spitting out. Yep, so that looks nice and flat. I'll move the rivet or the clamp just so I can get the rivet in. All right, flip it over. I think I can reach this one even with the clamp the wrong way here because I only have to drill a little bit. Perfect. Flip it over, put the rivet. And then our last one in the middle. Okay, looks like we didn't get too much stuff in between there, so we'll just go ahead and rivet this one in place. So let's realign this again. So we've got the bump facing up. This one is underneath. So this one is going to go with the bump facing up, but on top. Okay, so once again, I'm going to slide it off the edge of the table so I can actually get the clamp there to do it. And one thing I like to do is if you kind of bend this back, so instead of leaving it flat, if you bend it back like this, that kind of gives you a nice stopping point too. So that's a good place to kind of try to clamp it. All right, and this one sticks out a little bit on each side. That's okay. Let's make sure we're nice and level. Feels good. The one thing we want to check before we do anything else with this one, though, is, right, we tried to bend this down to give us a lip to align everything on. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into this, and I'm basically just looking for where the stuff lines up. And I want to make sure that I have sort of the same gap all the way along here. And it looks like I do. So we will be able to close and then open up past halfway. So that looks good to me. So same process now. We're going to drill on the side where the metal is and then flip it over to rivet. Okay, so we have our hinges attached on both sides. I'm going to turn it back so it's in the original orientation. So on this side, my hinge is on the bottom of the polycarbonate. On this side, it's on the top. And guess what? When we attach it to the robot, this side is going to go on our superstructure, or is going to end up attaching on the top of our robot. And this side, where the hinge is on the bottom, is going to end up attaching on the arm that's moving, but it's going to be on the bottom of the robot. So we'll write that on there just so we make it extra clear. And also, this is the arm side, and this is the frame side. All right, we're almost done with this step. We have a couple more things to do, and that is we're going to have some holes in here that we have to drill kind of in between our rivets on the hinges. And the idea is one of the ways in which this robot is adjustable, there are lots of ways that it's adjustable, but the idea is we're going to have some cables that actually keep this not flat, but a little bit bent most of the time. And that being able to decide how much to tighten or loosen that is going to help us control the actual positions that the arm reaches. So make sure it goes to the right spot to score on the high part of the grid, or be at the right height to grab a cone from the loading station, the human loading station. And so that's what those holes are going to do. We could drill those on the robot, but it's easier right now while this is out and free. And it kind of doesn't matter too much where you put these holes. We're going to have it running between the first two rivets. And I think in the official model, it's roughly centered in between the two rivets. So we'll aim for that. So I'll start on the metal side of the hinge here. And I have my two rivets. I'm going to go kind of in between. If you want it to be precise, you could measure. And so those rivets are 2 inches apart. So we could kind of eyeball 1 inch off of the center of one of the rivets. So that's about where we're going to want it to be. So right about here. And just also aim in the middle, up and down as well. We'll give it a couple of snaps there. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side here. Okay, and then for this one, we want to drill through the metal first. So I'm going to flip it over. And once again, we'll find our 1 inch mark, just pretty much right lined up with the hinge. Interesting. Maybe that's what I should have used. Okay, which means it should be lined up with the middle of that hinge too. Perfect. All right, so those holes we have to drill now. It's only going through a little bit of material. This looks like it'll be hard to get into the drill press. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp this just off the edge of the table so it won't move too much, and we'll be able to drill those holes in peace. And I think these holes, I mean, we'll drill the 3/16 drill bit through first, but I think we're going to open them up to a bigger size afterwards. Now, this metal it's steel instead of aluminum, so your drill bit might have a tendency to walk a little bit, like mine just did. If it does that, you can try again. Just try to be straight. The straighter you are, the less likely it is to walk. And if it's still walking, just hit it a few more times with the snap punch. And you'll see that is going to take longer because we are drilling through steel, and steel is harder than aluminum. Nope, that one won't stay still for me, so let's get some more snap punches in there. Okay, and then I think we're going to open these holes up to 1/4 of an inch, which is going to make it a little bit easier to string. There's going to be some steel cable running through there. Again, I think it fits through on the size we've got, but why not make it easier? All right, so I've got a 1/4 inch drill bit that I'm going to switch to. And we'll just follow the hole. I'm going to get a different 1/4 inch drill bit because this one is very dull. That is a 1/4. All right. Another thing you can do is if your drill bit does happen to be dull and you see it starting to smoke and burn like that, you can add a little bit of the cutting fluid. All right, let's finish this hole. Wow. There we go. All right, we'll just add some oil on this side too, just in case. I think this drill bit's a lot better. Or not. See, I think there's some melted polycarbonate on here, which probably isn't helping a lot. All right, let's try again. Okay, we got some smoke. That's fun. All right, we need to clean these holes up, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side of the polycarb on the other hinge. All right, and for these holes, we need to make sure that they are pristine because we're going to have a cable running through them, and that cable might move a little bit on the edge of the hole. So if the edge of the hole is sharp, that's going to be bad for, right? We don't want a sharp edge running on our cable. So make sure you get all of the burrs and the hole is nice and clean and smooth. That looks pretty good. Let's flip it over. And we'll make sure this side is also pretty clean. All right. Okay, so the first side looks good. Let's go ahead and flip it around. And I'm going to flip it over so we're looking at the metal side. And we're going to do the exact same thing. Oop, flip it over so I'm looking at the metal side. There we go. All right, and we already have our punches snapped. So let's get this clamped just off the edge of the table here. And I'll start with the smaller drill bit and then work my way back up. Okay, the hinges look good. Let's clean this up, bring the robot in, and get this attached to the rest of the robot. All right, we got our robot over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the arm in, let's lift it up, and then I'll unfold this one, and we can set it down on the table. I'll actually bring this forward so it can rest on my table here so we can see what's going on. All right, now, you'll know the arm is in the right orientation because these hinges are going to be on top. Make sure your hinges are on top and it's not off the back of the robot. Then we're looking for this arm crossbar here, the arm cross piece. And our panel is going to go from that arm cross. It's going to be this front surface here, and it's going to come all the way back to this top crossbar where we are going to attach on the bottom surface, the bottom back surface. All right, but there's one more trick, and that is when we made this, right, we had the bottom of this hinge underneath the polycarb. So we had the bottom on the bottom. Now, though, what we're going to do is we're going to flip this whole sheet over. Okay, so we should be seeing on the bottom, where we're going to attach it to the arm, we should be seeing the hinge and the rivets popping up. And we're going to bring that over and set it so that this rests on the front, right, of that crossbar there. And the next thing I'm going to do is we're just going to try to line it up so that we have an even amount of space on both sides. And then we're just going to try to get a clamp in here, holding it in place. And let's see, this we'll go this way. There we go. All right, so start both of them, and then we'll make some adjustments here. So this gap looks way bigger than that side gap, so we are going to slide everything over until they look about the same. And it doesn't have to be perfectly centered, but the closer we can get, the better it is. That looks pretty close. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and tighten this down. The other way we're going to align this is I'm pushing it down until that bump where the hinge is resting on the arm cross behind here. So this kind of won't go any lower. It's resting right on it. That's going to help keep it square and lined up with the piece. Okay, we'll tighten this one down. All right, so that is now on there, and we can kind of pivot that one back and forth easily. Before we attach it on that side, though, what I want to do is I want to get it attached on the other side as well. And I want to make sure that the whole arm can move the way we want it to move before we start drilling and doing any rivets. So on this one, right, the side that has these fancy brackets that we made, that we had to cut out of extra pieces from our chassis frame, we want to attach this to the opposite side of those. And let me see, get a clamp here ready to go. I'll do the clamp this way because I think if the clamp is going up, we'll have more room to be able to do our stuff. All right, and I'm just going to tip this up. So we have these front legs here, and I can kind of prop them up with something. And if I get it in the right spot, then we'll be able to just kind of line everything up and go from there. All right, and what we're looking for on this side is on the hinge. Let me pop this up to the top here really quickly. So on the hinge, if you look at this piece here, it has these grooves, right, in it, these cutouts in it. And I'm going to line up the line here of metal, just at the top of each of those little cutouts. I'm going to align that right with that bottom corner on my bar here. So if we can get that lined up, then we'll clamp it in on both sides here. So maybe just a tiny bit higher up on this side. Okay. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so again, I'm going to kind of push up on this until it is lined up and flat there. and then tighten the clamp. All right, so in theory, make sure all of my clamps are good and tight here. This should not move. So now what we can try is to see if we get the motion that we want. So we'll kind of bring this off to the side a little bit. And what I'm looking to do is to see if it can swing through the range of motion that we want without anything binding up or getting tight. And I'm going to go very slow, make sure the clamps aren't hitting anything. So I'm going forward, and basically if this folds flat like that and locks out, we're never ever going this high. So the fact that we got to this position means we're in good shape. And then if we come back the other way, we will pull it back up and in. And at this point, nothing looks like it's even remotely getting close to hitting. My rivets clear very nicely. The arm will never go this high into the robot either. And the important part is these hinges are pivoting nice and freely. So we are lined up. We're in a good spot. So let's go ahead and bring this back over to the table and let us start attaching those rivets. All right, let's get our drill here. Let me turn that a tiny bit. And remember, the last drill bit that I think we used was the 1/4 inch drill bit. Make sure you switch it back to the 3/16 drill bit for this step. All right, and we are just going to go across here, drilling and riveting and attaching this piano hinge. All right. I feel like I should throw the reminder out. I'm drilling kind of in a funny way just to try to not block the camera as much as possible. So, of course, when you are doing this, you should come around to the other side of the table and drill, forwards normally. All right, last rivet there. Looks good. And now we need to get the other set of rivets up here. And since we're going to kind of move this around and spin it around, I'm also going to take this opportunity to, once again, make sure nothing moved and it still spins nicely the way we want. And feels good to me. So now we'll go ahead and spin this guy around. And we're going to be working on these rivet holes up here. And actually, something I'm seeing here is the metal is pretty bent away in the middle. And so when we drill, that kind of gives it more space to get some of the shavings or some of the burrs in between the two pieces. So I'm going to throw one more clamp on, actually, in the middle here, just to kind of help hold that in a little bit better. And then let's start drilling. Okay, everything is attached now. Let's do one more check here. No problem, all the way back up as high as, like, we never go this high. We never go remotely close to this high. And all the way out to the front. Also, watch out for the pinch points here when you push this out. If your finger's inside here, it's gonna get squished, and that's not fun. And also, chain is a little bit dangerous. So you don't want your finger near the chain, because when this rolls, it'll pull your finger in it. So even when you're moving it by hand, just watch out where your hands are around the chain. Find all your pinch points. But that is good. We have the motion we want. Everything is moving smoothly. So that piece is completely attached. All right. All right, so that is it for this video. We have successfully attached our chain. We've got the lower arm links and our polycarb on here. So we've got our good 4-bar working. I will remind you, we talked about it for these bottom hinges here. If those rivets start getting loose on those bottom hinges, drilling through, replacing them with bolts, the same rule really applies everywhere on the robot. So if these top hinges or the piano hinges start getting loose and just keep getting loose over time, replace those with bolts. And it could be the same thing on the frame. If there's one part of the frame that just keeps getting hit over and over again and the rivets keep breaking or coming loose, you might think about putting bolts there as well. I think most of the gusset plates, though, are going to be fine as rivets. So that is it for today's video. Awesome job. We will see you in the next one where we start working on the intake. And as always, thanks to Argosy and Everybot.